Welcome to another episode of the Connected Lawyer Podcast. I am Bryan.
And I'm Aaron. Hey, everyone. So, Bryan, I've been thinking a lot about legal practice management systems, and I'm kind of in conversations with different folks about, which ones are the best and people migrating and, transitioning from legacy systems like, some of those old SQL based systems like PC Law are kind of getting converted to cloud installations. Nobody has a server anymore. And it's got me thinking, what is the reason? Like, what is the true value of a legal practice management system? And why does the legal industry seem to have such specific software for itself versus using, just Microsoft Office for everything, or Microsoft Office plus some widely available, kind of to do managing software like Todoist? We've talked about Trello, Asana, all of these like really popular, kind of project management applications that everybody's using. Why do we need a specialized thing? What are your thoughts on that?
So, I have a couple of thoughts. One is I think that today, given the appropriate personnel, you could probably do a lot of this just running Microsoft 365 plus maybe a couple of other things added into it. But I think even just a few years ago, that would have been really difficult to do well. Um, and it may have worked really well for one person, but once you get beyond one person, the more you're sort of kludging stuff together, the more difficult it becomes. And I think without what we have now, which is Microsoft 365, and it comes with a ton of stuff, including Microsoft Planner, which sort of replaces Asana or Trello or whatever, and Microsoft Teams, which seemed to really come to the forefront after COVID, so that people can work together on teams or whatever. I think before then, it just wasn't practical. That being said, I think there are advantages to using legal specific practice management software that you don't really get in uh, Microsoft or something along those lines, in terms of getting everything related to your case in one place. So just one aspect of that is, um, with respect to practice management, the term that's tossed around or used is matter centric. So the important thing that you're dealing with is the particular matter, and everything related to that is grouped together in your practice management software. And now you can sort of do that in Teams slash using SharePoint and Microsoft Office.
Hmm.
But even just a few years ago, that would have been really difficult to try to accomplish successfully, I think, with very many people. But that's the foundation that practice management is centered around. And there are a couple of things with that you can get, at least with certain practice management software, that you're not going to get in Microsoft. And one of those is your billing will all be there in addition to all of the information that you have, whether that's documents or contacts or emails or whatever it is that you have dealing with that matter. You're not going to have your billing, and then sort of related to the billing, you're also not going to have costs or things like that that are important to keep connected to that particular matter. They're not going to be really accounted for in the same way if you're using something like Office or Microsoft 365, I guess they call it now.
Hmm.
At least that's my initial thoughts on it. And I will admit, coming to this, I'm a practice management fan. I've been a solo since 2010 and have used some version of practice management software over that entire time period. I started with an on premises and then I moved to a cloud based, but I've used something that entire time period.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that you're a longtime solo practitioner, and one of the things that you mentioned a bunch of things there that we can kind of unpack. But one of the important things is this idea of being able to document a matter, what they used to say, paper the file. And so it's kind of important that if if you've undertaken legal responsibility, professional responsibility for somebody's matter, that matter be contained in, what we would normally call a file, or, some unified entity that would constitute the legal record of the matter for which you've undertaken professional responsibility. And as we get more and more electronic, the concept of what does or doesn't constitute the legal record of the matter, i.e., the file, that becomes kind of muddied, right? Like, okay, what is the file now? Right. It used to be
Right.
obvious. It's this thing in this red wall folder or whatever, this binder. That's
Right,
the
right.
file.
When you and I started practicing, the file was this giant file folder that sat in the in the file room or in somebody's filing cabinet, and it was stuffed full of pieces of paper. That was the file. I haven't opened a physical file like that since I went out on my own.
Yeah.
Uh, it's all electronic in some fashion, and you're right. That's a very different dynamic.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is. And I think if you're using, I don't know that it has to be a law practice management system, but probably any any platform, sort of any professional management platform would have this idea of it being responsible for designating what we call the file, right? And I think if you're training associates or if you're working with other lawyers, you should be able to say to them, okay, here's a matter, Acme Inc., Coyote versus Roadrunner. That's a matter that we've taken professional responsibility for. Point at the file. Tell me exactly what constitutes the file so that I know anything that isn't where you just pointed is not in the file. It needs to be filed. So if it's email, for example, you're not going to point at, well, your Outlook program and my Outlook program. Okay, emails are sort of automatically outside the file unless you have configured Microsoft Office in such a way that Outlook is using, let's say, groups, shared folders within the Outlook capabilities for doing that. And so then I would say, okay, well, this email needs to go into the shared Outlook folder because that is part of the file, right? Or it needs to get printed to PDF and put into the folder that we call the file. So, this is kind of a thing where, like, you probably don't care because if it's an email, you know that it's in your Outlook and there's nobody relying on you to put it in the file, right? So you just know, well, email is email.
right. But that's one of the great things about practice management software is if I grew and added somebody to the office, I hired an associate or a paralegal or legal assistant or somebody who needed access to that email, then I can start filing those in my practice management software. I don't do it now because, just as you said, I don't need to make that step. All my information needs to see only me because I'm the only one here. But if there's somebody else, then I can change that and easily incorporate that into my practice management. And I think that's sort of one of the things to think about if you are shopping for practice management is how easy it is to do or not do those sorts of things, because it is key. If you have multiple people who need to access all the communications on a case, they all need access to them, they all need access to all the contacts, all of the documents, and that could be within the practice management software, although most practice management, in my experience, doesn't do document management well. But most of them have some sort of capability of it, or it's and some sort of document management program, or whether you just have sort of your own system that everybody's supposed to follow. Those are sort of the three different options that you have there. But you got to pick one of those and figure out what you're doing.
Yeah, you kind of do. And I guess I would say that in terms of practice management systems, and I feel like I've tried maybe all of them at this point,
I was gonna say, I think you have a new one every month that you're checking out.
not quite that much, but I definitely find them very interesting. And I find, sort of the process of migrating data from one system to another, I just find it interesting. And I like, and you and I are both sort of this way, like to do app addicts. We just find that technology to be quite fascinating.
Right.
And so it's always interesting, like if a new practice management system kind of comes on the horizon, I'm sort of excited, like, oh, let's see, are they doing it the same way everybody else is? Have they managed to solve the problems? Because they all have problems. And so you're sort of waiting. It's very interesting to me that I think that the world of legal practice management system just feels like it's waiting still for someone to come along and make something that works, just great, that is truly innovative and different from the others. And it makes it very simple for us to see each other's calendar, for us to share email, to manage tasks in a really interesting, robust way. Like for example, just as an example, one of the things that drives me crazy with this task management stuff is a lot of practice management systems, you'll create a task. And let's say the task is, I don't know, draft a non-disclosure agreement, right? It's a simple thing. And so what you might want to do is say, okay, I want to attach the non-disclosure agreement to the task. But then when I open the task and then I open the document, I want it to be the actual document. So I'm editing that document and it's saving a new version back into the Microsoft system. And I close the document, I close the task, and it's all there. But it seems like instead, oftentimes what you have to do is open the task, open the attachment that's attached to the task, and then save it somewhere, because that's not a live document. It's not connected to the storage facility, the document repository
Right.
itself. It's a unique entity. That document is associated with the task, but it's not in the document management system. Whereas if you use, like you mentioned, Microsoft Planner, or if you use the Microsoft Team, kind of to do functions, in those cases you attach the document to the task. But what you're really doing is linking the task to the document that's sitting in Teams, which is really sitting in SharePoint. And so when you open
Right.
that task and you start editing the document, you're editing the actual document. There's no save as, and it keeps track of the versions and everything like that. So again, it's sort of like Microsoft is getting it, but they're not doing everything we need to do. You know what I'm saying? Like okay, what is the practice management system doing that Microsoft is not? And so Microsoft's not doing time and billing. And I,
Right.
I think I think maybe that's the thing. Maybe it's mainly time and billing, which comes with it this idea of trust account management, which truly is unique to the legal profession and is truly a very serious. There's a set of accounting and ethics rules that can be complex and that need to be managed carefully. So that's not something you want to wing. It's something that you really want to use software that is industry specific and dedicated to the task, so you don't make mistakes with your trust account management.
Right.
That's one thing that Microsoft just doesn't seem to have any concept of.
No, I agree. I think time and billing is the big thing that, and you almost seem to end up with a divide in the sense that, like, you're in your time and billing and your practice management and maybe some other stuff, contact management or calendaring or whatever. And the reality is the way mine's set up, that's just syncing with the same information that I have in Microsoft 365. So whatever's in the calendar in one's in the calendar in the other. And the same way with contacts. It's just in practice management, those contacts can be related in a particular matter.
Hmm.
And I can do a search for a contact and it will tell me every matter in which that contact is linked in whatever capacity they're linked as, perhaps as a client or as the opposition or the opposing attorney or whatever it is, whatever role it is that they happen to play that I've linked them in. But other than that, really, I think it's that time and billing piece. And I don't see Microsoft getting into that or integrating that really into what they do, because that's sort of outside their uh, what they're really trying to provide, I think.
Yeah, they have some. I mean, obviously they have Excel, and they had for a long time. I can't remember what it's called, like Microsoft Money, right? Microsoft. They had some
Right.
finance applications that had links to bank accounts. So they kind of had that technology, but it doesn't feel. It kind of feels like the QuickBooks and Zero and those specialty platforms kind of ended up taking that over. It's just just a hill that Microsoft never conquered. Um, so yeah, so there's that, and I think the other thing about Microsoft is that there's there's a unwieldiness to it in terms of it. Just thinking about Microsoft Office, both on the desktop and in the cloud, in insofar as it comes together through Teams and the portal, portal.office.com and the Microsoft 365 suite of applications that are tied together there. It's kind of like they have so many different ways that you can do it. They're trying to provide so many options so that you are happy as an individual, but as an organization, it's unwieldy and very difficult to corral everybody. This phrase we use, like herding cats.
Right.
Microsoft really facilitates that. Well, I guess they put you in a position of having to herd cats all the time. You can put things in
I,
folders or you can categorize things, and okay, well, some people do it one way, some people do it a different way.
I've actually lived this experience recently. My wife recently switched jobs, and where she worked before, they used Word, Excel, etc., but nothing else from the Microsoft ecosystem. And she's gone to a place that's full on Microsoft, and just and we watched several YouTube videos about this, just because she just keeps asking me, okay, what's the difference between planner or setting tasks and teams, and how does that relate to do, and what are lists,
Right,
and like, how do these all work together? And some of them work together great, others don't really connect to anything,
right.
and which should you use for what, and it's not always clear.
Yeah. It is, I think it is. Microsoft tries to operate in a similar way to Google insofar as, Google sort of has internal team competitions, where it's okay, this team is developing this Google product and it might be in competition with this other Google product. And so you see that with like the Google Workplace Suite or whatever they call it, where it seems like there are lots of different versions and you're not so sure which is which. But compared to Microsoft, Google feels very tightly integrated and very focused. You sort of know where you are. With Microsoft, okay, I use To Do. To Do seems built from Teams. They have some relation to Planner. The To Do app in Teams is not the same as the To Do app on the desktop. And don't even get me started on OneNote, because there's a OneNote for my phone, which doesn't seem to talk to the OneNote on my iPad and the OneNote on my desktop, and trying to keep those things in sync is just kind of, I don't know. It
Yeah,
feels
well,
it's
it's kind of crazy. I think we talked before. There's OneNote for Windows and OneNote for Microsoft 365, and those are two entirely different products with the exact same name, and one of them is going away.
Yeah, one of it's going away.
But
Right.
and it's just like, what are you doing here sometimes?
Yeah, and it's like all this stuff is it seems like good stuff. One note is very cool, and we have an episode on this a while back, and I'm still using it, although it's a bit of a struggle to use it as kind of pervasively as the one-stop shop that it could be for the reasons we just related. Um, but it kind of brings me back to something you said a couple minutes ago, which is this idea of kind of opening up a matter and everything is there, as opposed to I'm going to work on the Acme file today. I'm going to open up Outlook. I'm going to open up Trello. I'm going to open up Todoist. I'm going to open up, SharePoint because that's where my documents are. And so you have to sort of manually reconstruct the Acme file from the different applications that comprise it versus I'm going to open the Acme file and here's my documents, here's my timesheet, here's the communications, here's my notes. Everything is right there in one place. And yet, when an application tries to do that, they seldom do it well. Like documents, I think Net Documents does the idea of document repository quite well, but it's kind of all they do. And I think that
Right.
Todoist does the idea of the to-do list quite well, but again, it's kind of all they do. And so a company that's trying to do all of them at the same time tends to come up short in most of them. That's been my experience.
Yeah, my experience, especially when looking at practice management software, is that most of them, at least this is the impression I get, or the conclusion I've drawn, is most of them were designed to do something. And whatever that is, they are fantastic at it. And then
That's
they
right.
add in all the other stuff that you have to have practice management. And their success with that stuff is maybe not quite as well, and it makes it very difficult to pick a solution that may do all of those things well.
That's right.
Um,
And I've heard law firm technology consultants talk like that, where they will say, look, there's a bunch of legal practice management systems out there. What we need to do is pick the pain that you're feeling the most. Like pick the problem that is most urgently needing a solution for, and let's get the law practice management system that does that well, right? So if it's time and billing, then let's get the one that does time and billing best, and then you'll just be disappointed with everything else it's trying to do. It won't do documents great. It won't do to do great, and you'll just sort of live with them, or you'll live outside them and try to tie it together. Have you kind of had that experience where that's the
abs- a-
strategy?
Absolutely. And if you go through and you look at the different solutions available and what they're really good at, I think that's sort of how it breaks down. And I think a lot of them are good at time and billing, um, because that seems to be something that if you're going to be using practice management, you really need to be able to nail that. But any functionality beyond that, you sort of have the ones that are great at something, but it's not going to be the same. That's going to be different for every one of them. And yeah, you just have to figure out the problem you're trying to solve. And I think that's especially the case with that cloud-based systems. Um, Although, I think back and the on-premises version I used, solution I used before had terrible task management and to-do management in it, but had great calendaring features. I mean,
Nice.
I could write literally I could go in and for a matter type, whatever it is, I could set up, and I'll just use as an example, a real estate sale transaction, because there are a bunch of deadlines that are built into there. And some of those key off of the date that the contract was signed, and others key off the anticipated closing date.
Okay,
And I
right.
could go in and I could very easily put together an entire plan that says, contract date plus X, we need to get this done and set it all up for everything. And the same
Hmm.
thing, closing date minus Y, do the same thing. And, so anytime I created a new matter that was of that type, like boom, I put in one, two dates and all of that is immediately populates. And that was fantastic. Then I moved to a cloud-based practice management and it calculates from only one date. And that's
Hmm.
it. That's my option. One date. So like I don't have that robust plan ability that I used to have on that on-premises version. And honestly, I miss it sometimes. And you try to do some workarounds or whatever, but it is different.
Yeah,
So
and that is an interesting idea that I think, especially if you have a practice that feels like it can be organized by some sort of like some sort of structure, which I don't really feel like I have one of those, but it could be that I'm just sort of overlooking kind of some obvious patterns. And to say that more specifically, like there's one product that I've looked at several times, and I really sort of like the look and feel of it. And it's called Action Step, and it's an example of where you say, okay, this is a practice management system that seems to be designed for particular purposes. And I would say, in terms of Action Step, there seem to be two kinds of strengths that it really has. And not to say that the rest of it is not strong, but you can kind of get a sense of, okay, this is what they were really passionate about when they first built the initial framework of the system. And one is sort of accounting. Like, it feels like it was designed by accountants, and so it has a lot of details in terms of all of the reports that it can generate. And it sort of like, it could probably replace QuickBooks or whatever, kind of product that you're using for that whole accounting thing. And plus it has the trust fund management piece to it, because it's designed for lawyers. And so they're, obviously they have to get that right. So it has that, but then and it's right in the name, Action Step, is that it has a bunch of things. They seem complex to me because I never sat down and laid it all out and learned how to do it. But I think once you did it, you could design a matter where it would say, okay, step one, do this, do the engagement letter, right? Engagement letter fully signed. Now you can move on to step two, and step two is if it's I don't know much about real estate, but let's say we need the contract, right? And once the contract is done, we need the title work. And in parallel with the title work, you can be reviewing something else, that you can do at the same time as title work, maybe the inspection, right? And so you can have steps that can happen in parallel, and you have steps that cannot happen until something prerequisite has been completed. And so it sort of locks a team into a very, what appears to be a quite systematic way to process a matter. And I think that's cool. I'm actually not really aware of another product that does that, or at least focuses so intensely on the idea of like a system, right? A progress system.
and I have to tell you, I think that's fantastic. And I could do essentially everything that you're talking about there. I think I could do in tab/practice master when I had it. That was the on-premises solution I started with. And they had, like I said, some really powerful things you could do with the calendar. And a lot of that was just upfront work required on my part as to identifying what that is I need to do. You know, what steps
Hmm.
do I need to take? What order do they need to do? Are there things in there that are dependent on other things being done? Um, you know, uh, so there's a bunch of different options available there. And I think a solution like that can really help in terms of, especially when you've got multiple people in your organization, and so that not only can you create these tasks that need to be done or deadlines that need to be met, but you can assign them to certain people so that, you know, to stick with the idea of a real estate sale, like I can set up a task, set up this, we'll call it a calendar plan, and when I say we've got a new contract for a real estate sale, I could have it, assign, create a task to order the title and assign that to a paralegal or a
Yep.
legal assistant to order. And at the same time, create a task to review the title commitment that's assigned to me. This is my job to look at it when it comes back or to review the documents or whatever,
Yeah.
or so that um, you can have all these different things that need to be done and have them automatically created and assigned to people. And to do something like that is, I think, really useful. And I think to a certain extent, you can do a lot of that or something like that in Planner. If you learn to work it right, I've been sort of looking into that and ways I can do that. But with practice management, it's so nice because you just create it in there and then you link it to a particular type of matter. And then I got a new case, it's this matter type. And boom, it'll ask you for a couple of inputs for dates, maybe. And beyond that, it just automatically generates all those tasks and assigns them to wherever they need to go based
Hmm.
on, the uh, how you set it up to begin with. It doesn't know this magically, but it works, I think, pretty much with any practice area. You get a new assignment in to write a contract, and there are steps that you need to take: engagement letter, maybe review a contract from the other side, or review the specs, or if there's a letter of intent, or whatever it is, and the different dates that you can get steps done so to make sure that you meet your deadline. And I think that's useful if you can do that and find a way to leverage that. And that's in some sense requires thinking about, well, how do I actually need to do this type of project? And what are the constituent steps, not the project? Drafting a contract may be the ultimate goal at the end of the day, but that's not the checkbox on your to-do list, or at least it shouldn't be. There are steps in between there that need to take place.
Yeah, I like the
Uh,
way that you're describing that, and it kind of reminds me when we did 60 tips in Chicago last month, right? It was in June, I think.
yeah,
But one of your tips was the checklist manifesto. And
yes,
this is what how you're describing this now is reminding me of that tip and just this general idea that everything we do can and probably should be um, framed by a checklist. It's not like we do sort of robotic tasks, generally speaking, and in this day and age of AI, if that's all we're doing, a robot probably should do it. But there's definitely something to be said for our professional judgment and skill being led through a process by a framework that is tried and true, and so that you're not overlooking steps, you're not getting things out of order. You can't possibly remember, even if it's like a simple non-disclosure agreement. It's quite inefficient and probably impossible for you to just sort of automatically remember, okay, these are the 5 exceptions that it should contain. These are the types of ways that we describe confidential information. Oh, don't forget about an attorney's fee clause. Don't forget choice of law, choice of venue. You know what I'm saying? Like it kind of needs to be a checklist. And I do like the idea of the matter itself being in the form of a checklist. and it guides you
Right.
through, oh, this is that kind of matter. So they all get processed the same way. And maybe we're sort of heading towards that sort of lean law firm methodology if we're processing matters in a systematic, repeatable, kind of a repeatable process.
Absolutely. But I think a lot of it also goes back to sort of the underlying principle of David Allen's getting things done, which is get that out of your head and on a piece of paper that you can consult. And I can
Yeah.
tell you, not only it's useful, it's greatly stress relieving. Oh,
Right on
there you
my
do.
bookshelf. Good book. Good
it's
book. The
it
checklist
relieves
manifesto might be up there as well. I have to check and see where that is.
it it relieves your stress. Mine's on my iPad, so I know exactly where mine is.
Sure.
But it relieves stress in your life, and I really realized this after I created like really the first checklist uh, that I used in my practice, which relates to going back to real estate sales because when I represent a seller in a real estate transaction, there's a bunch of documents I have to put together and take with me to a closing. And I would always have in the back of my mind, do I have anything? Everything. What have I forgotten? What's going on here? And when I hired an assistant, that I had who worked for me for a few years. One of her jobs was to put together that package of documents for me to take with me to go to the closing. And I realized that she had no idea what was supposed to go in there. So I sat down and I made a checklist. These are all the stuff, and I actually sorted into different groups because I had stuff that only I needed. I had stuff that had to go to the other attorney, the buyer's attorney, and then a whole bunch of stuff that only went to the closer. And then and I actually worked with the closer on it to put it in the order because I was working with the same closer at the time, to put it in the order that was most convenient for her.
Mm-hmm.
So, so literally, here's all the documents you need, and put it in this order. And once I did that, life became better just because I knew, oh, I have everything that I need. Whether my assistant put it together, whether I put it together, I still use that list today. And I know, oh, I've also gotten to the point where I'm putting documents together with the checklist and I got, oh, I forgot to do X, whatever it was. Nothing significant, but just one of those things that I hadn't done yet. And the checklist reminded me. So uh, it's really a good way to relieve anxiety, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that these things that you're describing are not they're not necessarily applicable to large organizations or even just a 2 or 3 person shop. Like if you truly are a solo and it's just you, even so, you kind of need these procedures, and with procedures comes training, which can be self training. Like, oh, I need to remind myself when I open a file, here are the steps that I take. I need to remind myself when we do this kind of matter, these are the steps that I take. And so it kind of, you know kind of back to the full spectrum of the conversation. What is the value of a practice management system versus off the shelf tools like Microsoft and Todoist? um it it's sort of what it sort of says, well, the value is not that it just comes in and fixes all your problems. Like if you install a practice management system, isn't necessarily going to just sort of force you to do everything correctly all of a sudden. It really comes down to saying, here are the workflows that we follow. Here's where documents go. Here's where emails go. And you sort of have to get everybody on the same page, because these things, they're just not, it's not going to do your job for you, right? It's something that you have to really think through and get back to, okay, what is the legal record of the matter? It's this, this is all the components of it. This is where they're stored. Here's the dashboard view of it. And then how do we process those matters? Well, these get processed in this way, these get processed in that way. And it's kind of a combination of um, defining the legal record of the matter and then applying the appropriate checklists and workflows to that matter so that they get done in a reasonably similar way each time and you're being efficient and complete.
No, absolutely. I think you're right about that. And I will say, sort of going back to what you started saying about even solos, you need to think about this. I can tell you that when I brought my assistant on, when I first hired her, one of the things I did was I created an employee handbook. And,
Sure.
part of that dealt with, these are the hours and, this is the vacation policy and all that. But when I go back and look at it, that's a very small part of the book. Most of my book, and I say book, it's an electronic file on the computer on
Yeah,
the
right.
shared drive. But most of it is, this is how you file documents. This is how you name documents. This is the procedure that we follow whenever we open a new file in the practice management system. This is how we send our bills, at the end of the month, and how we know which ones we need to put in the mail and which ones are fine just sending out email. And honestly, a lot of that's changed over the years from when I first hired her until till now. But that was an extremely useful project for me because it made me think about all of those questions. And since then, I've urged people, even if it's just you, sit down and put this in a document. Even if you're the only person who ever looks at it, and maybe you never look at it again, but sitting down and thinking, this is how I'm going to organize my documents. This is the naming convention I'm going to use. This is, do I treat different types of documents differently? How and why? And all of that. And I think that sort of concept, applies just as you said. That's how we handle our documents, but how do we handle these types of cases or those types of cases? And to the extent we can get that in writing, uh down on a in a some sort of fixed medium so that we can look at it and reference it. I think that's better for our entire practice area.
Yeah, I still remember that slide deck that I don't know if you still use it, but you used to use that when you talked about paperless office. And remember, it's like a series of slides where you just push the button, and each button you push, it advances the step. The letter gets generated, and then it goes into this step and this step, and this is how it
Right.
makes its way into a PDF right into the file. And then you reverse it if a letter comes in. This is step by step by step. And I just thought that was one of the neatest slide decks I've seen to really visualize what is kind of a complicated process and something that if you're just winging it, you're going to end up with paper everywhere and things misfiled. That was a really nice presentation.
Yeah, I always enjoyed doing that one. And that was really that presentation evolved out of the work I had to do to think about, hey, what is my workflow? What is that process?
Right.
How do I handle this? Like, what is it? And part of that, I remember when I was doing some research and everything into writing my handbook, I came across some stories in which these firms didn't have any process, and the person at the who was responsible for getting the mail was told that they needed to scan it and save it and then make sure it gets distributed to the people that it went to, and that's all they were told, and they were scanning junk mail because nobody ever told them you have the authority to throw away the junk mail and you don't have to scan it and you don't have to save it somewhere. Instead, you have some authority there, so that's something to think about. Is okay, you don't literally want the person who's scanning the mail to scan every piece of paper that comes in the door,
Yeah,
in
right.
all likelihood. Like I got an advertisement today for some judge running for reelection. I don't need that scanned and saved in a file somewhere, that I may or may not want to look at it, but that gets saved in a round file, not in a computer file.
Yeah. And some of that kind of comes down to somebody just sort of not really getting it, in terms of how things flow and where things go, and what we consider to be like the official record of something. And I'm thinking not so much in junk mail, but like I used to work with a person, they would send me an email, and then we also had, like boxes where you could go and people could throw things in your boxes. And in that box was a copy of the email that they sent me. And it's like, hey, I don't, what is this for? This is not a,
Oh, I love that.
I know it.
How great is that?
It's like, why, we're not communicating on the same page here.
Yeah, there's an issue there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Yes, we must yeah, at least they didn't fax it to you too.
That's right. It did get faxed anyway, but and it isn't completely, there's some legitimacy to it in terms of, well, I don't know, like the email server can go down. I don't understand whether the backups are secure, and the idea of here's a printed copy of an important email, I'm putting that in the paper file, and I've been just comfortable with paper files, especially lawyers who are experienced, kind of grew up with paper files. And so there's a
Right.
comfort level to say, well, that's not going to get accidentally deleted. It's in a paper file. It might catch on fire or whatever, but it's always going to be there for the most part, right?
No, absolutely. And that's one of the things I tell people when I talk to them about going paperless is it's all right to keep paper for a while because everybody wants to, like, they don't want to get rid of it.
Right.
I said, and when you realize that you've never looked at a piece of paper, for the last 1, 2, 3, 4 months, whatever it is, then you can stop.
Yeah. Especially if
And
there's an ink
and
on it, like paper that has ink
right.
soaked into it. It's like, oh, this is such a special
This is
document.
special.
This is so
Yeah.
special.
Yeah, that the category of really special documents is very small. If it's not a will or a negotiable instrument or something, the reality is that that original document's living on somebody's computer somewhere, not
That's right.
in a piece of paper. But people get comfort from that. And so I found a long time ago that people were much more accepting of the idea of going paperless if you could tell them it's all right to hold on to your paper. And what I tell them usually, I know this is far afield from where we started, but what I tell them is, don't spend your staff time filing the paper in terms of, because I don't know about you, but in places I've worked before, you'd have a giant file folder, and inside that would be manila folders, and each document
That's
would be
right.
2 hole punched at the top and put in the
Yes.
prongs.
They
And
were
like
beautiful.
that's a lot of labor, time, and cost for nothing. I would say if you want to keep your paper, fine, just shove it in the folder,
Yeah.
and then you'll never look at it again, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and
And
worry
it,
about filing electronically.
That's right, and I don't know that that's too far from the tree on the topic, because the another kind of key thing to whether it's a law practice management system or whatever you view as the core system that drives your organization, law firm, medical records, engineers, whatever it is, when you scan an important document in and you destroy the original, so now it exists only in electronic form, the apparatus that holds it together and that keeps it secure and keeps it backed up and makes it always available is critical, right? It becomes an electronic entity that needs an apparatus to bind it, to the historical record of what you've done. And that's what's important, and I think that's why people get attached to paper, because they're not confident or they don't understand the electronic apparatus that binds it all together and makes it fine.
I think you're right about that, and a lot of it, I think, is um, not understanding or sometimes willful ignorance. They don't want to hear it. Like, oh, you're just talking, gobbledygook. It doesn't make any sense to me. But
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, that's right.
if they do understand it, then I think you're right. That helps a lot. That, oh, okay. So you're telling me that, not only is this document here on this computer, it's also on that computer and backed up to, the cloud here and to a local place here and, whatever setup you have, um, so that they understand that it's not just, you know, something there on their computer, because your experience with the computer is at some point in time it's going to break.
Hmm.
You're going to drop it, the hard drive's going to crash, something's going to go wrong. And if you don't understand that the version you have on your desk is the least important version ever, like
Right.
this is stored originally somewhere else, whether it's on a server or in the cloud, which is just a server in somebody else's office. But it's not, you can take your computer, throw it in the river, go get another one, hook it back up, and be back up and running with all that information. Again, once people can understand that, I think that helps a lot.
It helps a lot. And I can see, from the perspective of a very experienced lawyer, and especially someone who hasn't really kept up with every single change in technology, from 1985 to today, it can feel quite foreign, and it can feel very uncomfortable to say, well, I'm just going to scan this into the scanner. It magically goes into the system, and now I can shred this document, which feels quite important. It has ink on it and everything. That can feel very kind of, they could be fearful about that. And I could see like a future world where I'm a very experienced lawyer who hasn't kept track of things, and there's a whole new system. They say, well, here, just take this document and light it on fire, and don't worry, it's fine. It'll be in the system. That's how it works. And I'm like, what? How? you know
Yeah, the new fire system.
Yeah,
I
just
would be
toss it in
all
the
for
river
that.
and it's fine. I mean, that's how it feels to someone who isn't, super tech
No,
savvy.
absolutely.
Yeah, oh, just throw it in the river, toss it in the fire, and it's fine.
You're telling me this document, of which I've saved the same thing, thousands of versions of this
That's
over
right.
the years that I've been practicing. And it's very important that I've kept it. Not only have I kept it, I've kept it in a very organized file
Yeah,
and paid people, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years to, hole punch these in a particular manner and file them in a certain way. And I've had entire rooms or storage spaces dedicated to preserving and maintaining me. And you're telling me I should just get rid of it?
right. Yeah.
Like
And then
that,
every story
I
that
get
comes
that.
out,
That's
oh, this company lost all this data. This company had a breach. This company got ransomware. I mean, that kind of, they're not wrong. Like
right.
it is, there are risks that need to be managed, you know. So it's not a guarantee that that electronic document is always going to be available unless it's in an apparatus that has, all the security and the availability and the overall management, um, kind of locked down in a tight way, which takes you back to this idea. Okay, that's why we trust a company that is focused on legal practice management, because we expect them to have thought this through. We expect that when we scan something into their system and we shred this, that they have thought about all these risks, and they can fairly confidently guarantee that I'm doing the right thing, that I'm operating in a best practices way, and that I am fulfilling my professional obligations to do things in a professionally responsible way for my clients. That it comes with that idea that we have an apparatus that keeps us operating in a professional and business-like manner, and we can feel quite confident in that fact. You know.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. That and that's the key to overcoming a lot of resistance. I think sometimes in terms of moving to whatever you're going to move to. whether that's getting rid of paper or moving to practice management, or and whatever you do, don't do both at the same time.
That's right.
Like,
Pick a horse, right?
yeah, yeah, like uh, changes are important, and we need to constantly be changing, how we do things, not to change for change's sake, but just because the world has changed. How
Got to
I
keep
did
up.
things the first time I wrote that employee office manual is quite different from how I do them now, just because the technology has changed greatly.
Sure.
So there's, uh, you know, overcoming that resistance is difficult when you're trying to make any sorts of changes, but it's really tough a lot of times when you're trying to make a major change like this, like going to practice management. Why isn't Microsoft good enough for this? And if you're trying to make a change, you need to understand why it's not good enough, or why it's not doing what you need to do. Uh, and I just think back to I was once at a presentation in which somebody was talking about how they create their own time and billing system by using Excel, which
I
you can
think I've been to that
absolutely
presentation.
and you can absolutely do that.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about how, it didn't cost them any extra money, which is true. But you know what? While he was giving that presentation, I ran my bills and my time and billing system, sent them, went through them, sent them out, and somebody paid me.
Yeah.
Uh, while I was listening to him talking about how he uses Excel to try to do this. And I was just thinking, there are times when this specialized software, exists for a reason. I go through, I generate the bills, I look at them, make sure they're correct, make any changes. And when I'm done, I'm like, Bill. And what's it do? It sends out a copy of the invoice to all of my clients. And in that email where they send the invoice, there's a link that says, hey, if you'd like to pay me, click here.
Yep.
And they click there, it takes them to my payment processor, and they can pay me. Doing that manually or paying somebody to do that manually, instead of just literally pushing one button, one mouse click, and having that happen, there's a huge difference there.
Yeah, and
And
I will say I've seen that presentation a couple times, and I know that he's very good at Excel, which I think puts him in a different category than a lot of us.
most attorneys, yeah.
Yeah, so he's capable of doing that, but it doesn't capture everything that a time and billing system can do. It's very focused on a specific task, but the value of that also kind of shows like all the different things you could do with Excel, and things that, for a lot of people, Excel just kind of sits there as a program that they never use because they don't really understand the basics of it. And so when he walks you through that, you might not take away, well, I should build my own practice management system or time and billing system anyway, but you do walk away thinking, well, there's a bunch of stuff I can do with Excel now, right? It does come in handy for adding up a column of numbers and, relating things to one another. So, and it also, I think it's a neat presentation in terms of it sort of peeling back some of the complexity of these really modern, complex time and billing systems, and showing you the underlying mechanics that you have to think through, so that you sort of get what you're doing when you operate that stuff.
Right. And there is a lot that you can do with that. And especially if for whatever reason you're really fiscally challenged. And that could be not that your practice isn't successful, but maybe you're in a practice area that just isn't terribly profitable, but is important, like doing some sort of public interest work or providing assistance to nonprofits or other people in need that may not have the ability to pay or pay much, and you still want to be able to do something. Well, it's great that I can do all of this, and and Excel if I need to. And there's a lot of things that you can do. Learning how to use the spreadsheets, and pulling information from one sheet to another, so you can have sort of a front sheet that gives you, a calculation that shows maybe all the money that's been billed, all the money that's been paid. So that first sheet in your workbook is just sort of a summary, and then you have subsequent sheets afterwards that are different months or whatever.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of things that you can do there. I think you're right about that, but um, there's also software that will do all that back end hard work for you, and you just have to pay them for it. So
Yeah,
that's a
maybe we'll
time
have
or
him as a
money.
guest on the show, and he can defend his Excel system. That could be fun.
That would be awesome. It looks like we've rambled on for quite a while now. Maybe this is a good place to wrap up.
I have a lot to think about, so for sure. Yeah, good talk.
So I'll thank everybody for joining us today. If you have any questions, comments, topics, suggestions that you want us to talk about, feel free to shoot us an email at info@theconnectedlawyer.com. In the meantime, thanks for joining us, and I'm Bryan.
I'm Aaron. We'll see you in the next show.